Jesus said to them, I am he. And Judas, who betrayed him, also stood with them. Now when he said to them, I am he, they drew back and fell to the ground. Then he asked them again, Whom are you seeking? And they said, Jesus of Nazareth. Jesus answered them, I have told you that I am he. Therefore, if you seek me, let these go their way, that the saying might be fulfilled, which he spoke, of those whom you gave me, I have lost none. So, no doubt this is very fresh in our minds, from Friday Eve, of the Holy Bascha. But we'll go through maybe some things that are not so quite obvious in the passage. It said when Jesus had spoken these words, so by words it's referring to the prayer, but Jesus, that prayer that he prayed out loud in John 17, we were saying before, it's not just a prayer. St. Augustine would say it's a discourse. He wanted the disciples to hear what kind of relationship the Son had with the Father. And so that's why it's called the words, rather than when he finished this prayer. And this brook Kidron, it's an important brook because if you remember King David, when Absalom, his son, rebelled against him and he wanted to kill him, King David went barefoot and he covered his head and he left Jerusalem to avoid contention with his son and civil war and a bloodbath unnecessarily, and he left the kingdom for Absalom, even though he knew what would likely happen and that God would defend him. But he passed by, King David passed by this brook Kidron, and he was weeping. And so the Lord Jesus, the Son of David, crosses over the same brook Kidron because he too, but in a much more severe sense, he's rejected. Even though he's the rightful king, as David was the rightful king, but he's rejected. And so he crosses by this brook. This brook Kidron as well. So it's a brook, it's a very narrow passageway for water, but the water's black, the water's really dirty. And the reason the water's dirty with this black stuff is because the kings of Judah in the Old Testament, some of the really loyal kings, when they'd smash the idols in the kingdom and revive the kingdom of Judah, they would take the idols that they'd smashed and burned and they'd throw the remains in this valley near the brook Kidron, so all the remains go into the water. That's why the water is all dirty. And in modern times, they would take the sacrifices from the temple, all the ashes and the disgusting stuff, the residual, and they would dump it there as well. So this brook Kidron became like a waterway in a valley that was pretty much a dumping ground for the residue of the sacrifices. So there's this threefold importance, but that's why Jesus crosses this brook Kidron, because he takes all the sin of the world that's symbolized, whether it's in the Old Testament destruction of these idols or in the residue of these burnt offerings. He takes it all, and there's a psalm that says that he drank of the brook by the wayside. So the fathers think that as Jesus was crossing this brook to enter the Garden of Gethsemane, he drank this, like we said, this water with black stuff in it. He drank this water as if he was, drinking or getting ready to drink the sin that he would carry on the cross. So that's the brook Kidron. And there was a garden there. The garden, we think, was probably owned by one of Jesus's friends, because in those days, if you had the money, you'd have your home in Jerusalem, but you'd have your garden outside on the Mount of Olives outside the city. And so it's probably an acquaintance that allowed him into the garden, and he and his disciples entered there. And as verse 2 says, it was a place that was well known to Judas. It's important because what John is trying to say, what John the Evangelist is saying to us here, is Jesus was by no means fleeing. He was by no means trying to escape from those whom he knew were coming at him, especially Judas. He actually picked a place that Judas knew very well. This is one of Jesus' favorite spots. And he didn't allow Judas to know where the Last Supper would be, because he wanted the Last Supper to take place. Because if he told Judas where the Last Supper would take place, no doubt Judas would have taken that as the opportune time and Jesus wouldn't have been able to establish the Last Supper. But he went to a place that was very familiar to Judas. He often met there with his disciples. And in verse 3, this is where, I know we hear this a lot in Passion Week, but it's good to, as the fathers point out, it's good to pay attention to what Judas came with. Judas came with a detachment of troops. Now, some people actually think that that was a Roman delegation, like a Roman delegation of troops that Rome entrusted to the temple in addition to the officers and the to the officers that are mentioned. So see how it says in verse 3, there are troops and there are officers from the chief priests and Pharisees. So some people think there were two lots of men who came to arrest Jesus. Romans who were entrusted by Pilate. Did Pilate know Jesus was going to be arrested in the garden? We don't know. We don't know. Was he surprised that they brought Jesus to him? It seems like he was, but maybe not totally surprised. But there were Romans there, we think, Roman troops, and also Jewish officers who were the temple guards. Now they came there with lanterns and torches, so obviously to be able to see in the dark, but more importantly to identify Jesus, and they came with weapons. Now, it's important that we acknowledge that they came with lanterns and torches. Now, there's a lot of symbolism here, okay? Obviously, they came with lanterns and torches, and they came to arrest the light of the world, okay? But they're all darkness, and Jesus says, this is your hour, the hour of darkness. And they're coming with weapons, Well, what are weapons going to do against God? But it's important to know here, the fathers all stressed, Jesus delivered himself up. He delivered himself up. And that's why in verse 4 it says, Jesus, therefore, knowing all things that would come upon him, he went forward. He didn't wait until they came to him. They thought that, we'll bring lanterns and torches so that if he's hiding, we can suss him out and see him. Now, he goes forward. He knows what would come upon him. And in courage, he goes forward and he says to them, whom are you seeking? They answered, Jesus of Nazareth. Jesus said to them, I am he. And Judas, who betrayed him, also stood with them. Doesn't this sound strange to your ears? Jesus has been in Jerusalem for some time. The people that are coming to arrest him, most of them have seen him before and have heard him preach before. So, for example, it's quite likely that the officers from the chief priests are the same ones that earlier on, when the chief priests and the Pharisees sent them to arrest Jesus, they came back saying, we've never heard a man speak like this before when he's preaching in the temple. They knew him. They knew what he looked like. They knew what he sounded like. So why is it that when he comes forward and he says, who are you looking for? And they say to him, we're looking for Jesus of Nazareth. And he says, I am he. And Judas is also with them. How is it that none of them, including Judas, recognize Jesus? What are your thoughts? Notice in verse 5 it says, and Judas who betrayed him also stood with them. How is it that none of them recognize Jesus? What do you think? Talk to me. You're allowed to talk. Come on. Yeah, they will fall backward in verse 6. And why they fall back, like it's a mystery. Did his face shine? And that's why they fell backward. Did they feel a force that propelled them backward? We don't know. It's a mystery. But what about just before? Just before he replies to them, how is it that they don't recognize him? Has it ever happened before that Jesus was in a public place and was unrecognizable? Yeah, 100%. You said it perfectly. He didn't choose to reveal himself. There are instances where, like you were saying, they were going to stone him on several occasions and throw him off a cliff really early in his ministry. And the Bible says he either walked in the midst of them. How do you walk in the midst of people who are trying to stone you or are going to push you off a cliff, like without them touching you? How do you do that? Did he walk in the midst of them visibly and just restrain them invisibly? And other times it says he hid himself from them. What does that mean? Did he remove his body physically from them, or did he disappear? And so he was hidden from them. It's a mystery, but there are a few times when in the midst of a multitude, Jesus, for all intents and purposes, would vanish because it wasn't his time. The Bible keeps saying his hour had not yet come. And this is another instance here. The fathers think exactly that. He made himself unrecognizable. Do you remember the disciples on the road to Emmaus? They had the same sort of thing, right? They walked with Jesus for about 6 hours. How do you walk with Jesus for 6 hours after you've been with him for 3 years and you don't know what he looks like? You can't recognize what he looks like or what he sounds like? It's a bit far-fetched, isn't it? Unless the one who controls everything decides not to make himself known. So here Jesus doesn't want to make himself known. Yeah. Yeah. The only time they recognized it was him. Yeah, some people think that it's because they were so depressed that they weren't able to recognize him. That's also a possibility. But the Bible also says that as soon as he broke the bread, their eyes were opened. Their eyes were opened with the disciples in Emmaus as soon as he broke the bread. Why? Did he break the bread in a special way? Or is it like what happens in the Eucharist, in the breaking of the body of Christ, our eyes are opened like a spiritual enlightenment? Why? It's more likely that he opened their eyes when he chose to open their eyes, because he controls everything. In this passage, for example, it's actually very important for us to recognize. None of the fathers say it's because it was dark. I was waiting for anyone to say because it was dark. None of you said that. Okay, it was dark. Okay? No, it wasn't. Look, Judas knows him. Didn't he say, whoever I kiss, he's the one? Why doesn't he just go and kiss him? Because he doesn't know where he is. He can't see him. So Jesus goes and says, who are you looking for? And they said, Jesus of Nazareth. And then he says, I am he. And Judas is right there, and Jesus refuses to allow himself to be recognized. Why is it important? Because they came with lanterns and torches. He wants to show them, you're so weak. It's really important, right? Because he's about to do something that's unthinkable. He's about to deliver himself to them. But before he delivers himself, Jesus is insisting on something. Before you touch me, I need you to understand something. You are so weak. The only reason you're going to touch me is because I'm letting you touch me. It's really important. Okay? This is God delivering himself into the hands of men. And so it's actually beautiful when you read this chapter. We're looking at verse 5 especially. When you read this chapter, do not see Jesus as weak. He's actually incredibly mighty. And he is making a point. You wouldn't even recognize me if I didn't allow you to recognize me. You can come with all the lanterns and torches that you want. You're not going to recognize me. You could be my disciple of 3 years. You won't know my voice and you won't know what I look like. I have the power not to be recognized. I'm delivering myself into your hands. This Jesus of Nazareth, you guys know that's an insult. Like whenever they call him of Nazareth, it's insulting him. They're trying to have a go at him. It's like Nathanael says, can anything good come out of Nazareth? Okay, and Nicodemus gets, he gets put down by the Sanhedrin when he tries to defend Jesus. Can a prophet ever come out of Galilee? So it's like we're looking for this no-name guy, Jesus of Nazareth. Okay, whenever they wanted to insult Jesus, they'd say that. What does he reply and say? I am he. Does that ring a bell? I am he. Where have you heard I am he before? Old Testament, where? Proverbs, earlier? I am he. Excellent, okay? Moses asks God, what's your name? And God says to him, I'm not going to tell you my name. Okay, because it's not the time. You'll know who I am when I incarnate. But for now, I am who I am. I am he. In Greek, it's ego eimi. I am the self-existent. I am the one who was and who is and who always will be. I am. That's what Jesus said here. It's not like you and I when we say, here I am, it's me. It's not that. It's actually I am. And that's exactly what he said before, and that's why they were going to stone him when they were saying to him, oh, who do you think you are? We're children of Abraham. He goes, Abraham saw me. Me and Abraham, we used to have good times together. But before Abraham was, I am. Okay? That doesn't make sense in English. You should say, before Abraham was, I was. No. Before Abraham was, I am. Ego emi in Greek, or in the Aramaic, ehua ana. I am. I am who I am. That's the name of God. You don't even write that name without washing yourself first if you're a scribe, okay, going through a certain ritual purification. And you certainly do not read that name when you're reading the Torah. You read, and when you get to the name, you skip it, and you read what's after it. You don't even utter the name of God. So Jesus here is uttering his name. He's announcing who he is. And that would explain in verse 6, when he said this to them, when he said to them, I am he, they drew back and they fell to the ground against their will. I want you to see like what the Father saw. Everything here is happening against the will of those that came at Jesus. They came with lanterns and torches to recognize him, and they came with an intimate disciple. Neither the lanterns and torches nor the intimate disciple will allow you to recognize me if I do not wish to be recognized. I will reveal myself when I'm ready. The second thing is, against their will, they fell backward. More than likely, when God declares his name, the force of the name probably propelled them backwards. It's not unreasonable that they were flung in the air and they fell backwards. It's not a voluntary movement, something that happened to them. It's a miracle, okay? There's lots of miracles that will happen in this garden, but nonetheless they go through what they're going to go through. Then he asked them again, whom are you seeking? And they said, Jesus of Nazareth. Verse 8, Jesus answered, I have told you that I am he. Like, I don't understand what the delay is. I've told you now, this is the second time I'm telling you I am he. Therefore, if you seek me, let these go their way, that the saying might be fulfilled which he spoke. Of those you gave me, I lost none. In the previous prayer, he prayed for his disciples that none of them would die tonight. None of them would fail in their faith completely tonight, and that's true except for the son of perdition who chose that. What was Jesus doing here? Was he asking, please don't touch the disciples. If you want me, let them go? Some movies, it shows that. If you watch how Jesus is portrayed in some movies, it's like he's saying to them, hey, you came for me, take me, but please let them go. It's not that, it's a command. It's a command. The Father he's saying, if you seek me, let these go their way, that the saying might be fulfilled. So hang on, you're being arrested and you're commanding. Think logically with me. These guys, okay, they are trained killers. They're coming to arrest Jesus with a lot of hatred, and it'll show you, I'll prove to you how they're coming with a lot of hatred. Here is this criminal in their eyes to be arrested, and he's surrounded by a little pathetic mob of 11 men. Why didn't they just take them out? At least why didn't they arrest them? What are your thoughts? Why didn't they arrest the disciples, or why didn't they hurt the disciples? It's not a rhetorical question. Talk to me, come on. Why not? Didn't you ever think that? Why didn't they get hurt? They were scared of him? They certainly were. They were terrified of him. Do you know that the detachment that they employed, some of the commentators were saying, we are talking about, because the Romans love to send like big envoys, okay? We're talking about a detachment here, the Romans together with the Jews, probably in excess of 1,000 trained men. 1,000 trained men, plus a lot of Pharisees and scribes. Yeah. Yeah, it could have been that they wanted to do it quietly, but no one's going to miss a few fishermen. And it's in a garden. One of the fathers was saying, or a few of them, the reason Jesus chose a garden is because there's no one there. He deliberately gave himself into their hands. He didn't let it happen in the city so no one could defend him. and then get hurt. He went to an isolated place. So if they wanted to, like if they really wanted to, just think with me, if they really wanted to, they could have killed Jesus then and there. No one would have known. They could have killed all of them, buried them, and gone home. Yeah? It's a scenario. They could have. Maybe he'll know, maybe he won't. But there's a more disgusting reason why they didn't. It's because the chief priests wanted Jesus on a cross. If they wanted him assassinated, they would have hired goons and they would have assassinated him, but they wanted him hung on the cross. They wanted to humiliate him and defame his reputation for all time. And more than anything else, they wanted everyone to see him as cursed by God, because the Old Testament said, "Cursed is he who hangs on a tree." So there's that reason. But why didn't they hurt the disciples? Who cares? The simple reason that the fathers say is because they were commanded not to. They were commanded not to. How many things have they done against their will? They could not recognize him, though it was their will to recognize him. They were flung backwards, though it was their will to arrest him. And they couldn't touch the disciples, though it was their will to hurt them. They should have arrested the disciples. It actually made sense to arrest the disciples. The first question that's going to come out of Annas' mouth is, "Jesus, tell me about your disciples and about your teaching." He wanted them. He wanted the 12. And another proof is right after the resurrection, they had them there and they were going to kill them all in one fell swoop. Because that's how you take out the memory of someone. You take out their disciples. So Jesus here commanded that his disciples not be touched, and they weren't touched. He didn't lose anything. Now, Simon Peter. Then, when did Simon Peter strike the ear of the high priest? Only after what had happened. What did he just see with his eyes? What did he just see with his eyes? We just read it now. Jesus said, I am he, the name of God. And what happened to them? They fell backward. Did you know that's why he got courageous to do what he did? That's why St. Peter was like psyched, and he took out a sword, because he saw this is game time. Did you see what Jesus just did? Jesus just, with a word out of his mouth, he propelled them all backward. So he takes out his sword with no provocation. No provocation. Because in the movies, it's a bit, if you watch The Passions of Christ, you watch The Passions? Yeah? He takes out the sword when they do this to Jesus, and they touch him, as if they're manhandling him, right? And then he takes out the sword when he sees Judas and everyone conspire. Actually, no. Okay, no. They were just flung backwards they just got off the ground. There's no provocation. They're all terrified of Jesus, and Peter takes out the sword, and off he goes. Then Simon Peter, having a sword, drew it and struck the high priest's servant and cut off his right ear. He probably wasn't going for the ear, obviously. Okay? He was going for the head. The servant's name was Malchus. Thank God he didn't behead Malchus. What would have happened if he beheaded Malchus? You think St. Peter went for Malchus's ear? You sure? Do you know how hard that is? If I had a sword... Yeah, but good for us, thank God, Peter is not a trained swordsman. He's just a fisherman. He's probably never killed a chicken in his life before. Okay? But what was he doing with the sword? I don't know. I don't know what he was aiming for. It's unlikely he was aiming for the ear. It's unlikely. And I have no idea why he even took out one sword. What's he thinking? What's he thinking? They only had 2 swords, right? In the meal, they only had 2. We're talking about an escort of 1,000+ soldiers. What's he thinking? Logically, what are you doing? What are you thinking is going to happen? I think he's banking on Jesus doing it again, having a bit of a show. I think he's banking on Jesus using his power. He takes out the sword. I don't know what he was doing. The ear came off. So Jesus said to Peter, "Put your sword into the sheath. Shall I not drink the cup which my Father has given me?" Okay, and in other Gospels, it talks about those who take the sword shall die by the sword. But this time it says, "Shall I not drink the cup which my Father has given me?" And again, Jesus is insisting, my Father gave me a cup. I will drink it, but not before. not before I let every single one of these human beings know you can't touch me unless I let you touch me. Okay, I know I've repeated it over and over again, but it's so important. It's in this chapter because the rest runs along the same theme. We are talking about God delivering himself into the hands of men, but it's a divine plan. Then the detachment of troops and the captain and the officers of the Jews arrested Jesus and bound him. I didn't know this. Did you know that the Gospel of St. John is the only Gospel that says Jesus was bound, like tied up? I didn't know that. Did you know that? Who knew that? Some trivia. Some cool trivia. Okay? It's the only one they said that they tied him up. Why would you tie him up? I think you guys said it already. They were terrified of him. They were terrified. They somehow thought that if we tie him up, then he can't work any miracles because he needs his hands, okay, whatever, to work miracles. But some say the way that they arrested him, and I know that some movies show this in different ways, the way that they arrested and bound him is the way that you'd bind an animal. In Isaiah it says he was led as a sheep to the slaughter, okay, and as you'd like drag an ox. So they think that they put a chain around his neck, some kind of collar or a chain around his neck, and literally dragged him like an animal, and that they put his hands probably behind his back in such a way that when they tie you up, it's not the police handcuffs of the modern day times where, excuse me, may I please, I've never tried it, but I'm just saying, you see it in the movies, I'm going to gently put the handcuff on you, I don't want to hurt you, I don't want to bruise you. No, it's likely that the way that they bound him shed blood. It's very violent, very aggressive binding and chaining around the neck. So the beginning of the humiliation starts. And that's why we said it's so important. From the beginning, these humans need to understand you are only touching me because I'm letting you touch me. So important to God. You know, we often think of Jesus as meek and humble and gentle, and he's all those things, but we forget his authority. He went through all this as one having authority. At every stage he says, you would never be able to touch me. So then they tie him and they arrest him, and they led him away to Annas first, for he was the father-in-law of Caiaphas, who was high priest that year. Now it was Caiaphas who advised the Jews that it was expedient that one man should die for the people. And why did they go to the Annas first? Probably because Annas is senior. They say Annas had 5 sons, all 5 became high priest during Annas' lifetime. They took it in turns, which wasn't the law of Moses. And Caiaphas, his son-in-law, was now the high priest. So out of respect, they went to Annas first, and then they went to Caiaphas. In verse 15, and Simon Peter followed Jesus, and so did another disciple. So hang on, how are they following Jesus? Didn't all the disciples forsake Jesus and flee in the garden? Yes, they did. Even John, okay? When Jesus came to get arrested, they all fled. They all fled. But 2 came back. John came back, Peter came back. Simon Peter followed Jesus, and so did another disciple, John, but he doesn't say his name out of humility. Now that disciple was known to the high priest and went with Jesus into the courtyard of the high priest. Maybe through his family, the high priest knew him. Some people even think it's because like his dad sold fish to Caiaphas, so Caiaphas knew him really well, on good terms. We don't know, but he was known to Caiaphas, so he was allowed into the courtyard. But Peter stood at the door outside. So John went inside with Jesus into the chambers of Caiaphas where Jesus would be tried, but Peter stood at the door outside. Then the other disciple, John, who was known to the high priest, went out and spoke to her who kept the door and brought Peter in. So then Peter goes in with John, or for a little while at least. Then the servant girl who kept the door said to Peter, "You are not also one of this man's disciples, are you?" He said, "I am not." What's that called? When he says, "I am not," what is that called? It's called a denial. Okay? It's a denial. Is that a big deal? To say, "I don't know Jesus"? Is it a big deal? It is a big deal? You sure? Prove it to me. Yeah, exactly. Well done. Okay, Jesus said, if you confess me before men, I'll confess you before my angels in heaven. If you deny me before men, I'll deny you before my angels in heaven. Who was this girl? I know it says servant girl. Look, either she was young and quite poor and quite unintimidating and no one was around, and she's just saying to him, probably in a compassionate way, she's saying, hey, are you one of this poor man's disciples? Are you one of that guy's disciples, the one that's got it really hard in there? Do you follow him? I feel sorry for him. She's not accusing him. That's not the tone. It's, you're not also one of this man's disciples, okay? She doesn't say this deceiver's disciples. It's a really gentle question. There's no threat, but Peter denies. There's no threat, but Peter denies. So this denial of the three is perhaps the most inexcusable one. There is no threat to Peter. Verse 18, now the servants and officers who had made a fire of coal stood there, for it was cold, and they warmed themselves, and Peter stood with them and warmed himself. Before we go on, anything odd about that verse? Verse 18. So John interrupts his narrative about Jesus, and then he talks about Peter, and then he'll come back to Jesus, and then he'll go back to Peter. Okay, so he quickly mentioned Peter. We're going to leave Peter at this verse, and then we're going to go to Jesus, then we're going to come back to Peter for the second and third denial. But in verse 18, does anything sit strange or unusual? Who are the officers? Yeah, and the temple guards. Probably of them, those who came to the garden, right? Please answer the question. Yeah, that's brilliant. Answer that question now. Why was he standing with them? Possibly. Actually, the fathers think that the way that the courtyard was positioned is he could see and probably hear what was going on inside. So it's really close. Don't imagine a massive courtyard. Imagine like it's a courtyard, but he's really close to the action, earshot, and can see. Perhaps he wanted to know what was going on. But what does the Bible say? The Bible says they made a fire to make themselves warm, and he stood with them to do what? To warm himself. Why is he standing with them? It's not a trick question, this one. Why is he standing with them? To warm himself? Yeah, that's what it's saying, right? Really? So the master's inside. John called you inside. The servant girl put you off. You denied. And now you're going to stand and warm yourself. What could possibly happen after this that's good? You tell me, what could possibly happen? When you stand with the opponents of God, when you stand with the enemy, when you go to those that hate God and love sin, what are you expecting to happen? What am I expecting to happen? He wasn't, in this case, he wasn't hoping to change their hearts. Look, what does it mean to warm yourself spiritually? It means you're cold and you want to make yourself warm spiritually. You lack love, so you want love. You lack respect, so you want respect. So you hang around people who are going to give you, in inverted commas, love and respect, but those people are not godly. And the way you're going to feel loved and respected is by sinning. Think about it. Think of any bad environment. Think of any wicked company. St. Peter here is deciding to spend time with wicked company. He would have been better off going home. He would have been better off going home than standing with the enemies of God. Something bad has to happen. We're going to leave it there. Okay? We're going to leave Peter there. The two things that are not working for Peter now and that make this a very, very tragic story is the first one happened at the Last Supper. He made himself out in presumptuousness, in arrogance, in self-confidence. He made himself out as someone who loves Jesus more than all the other disciples. Can you believe he said that out of his own mouth? He said, if everyone denies you, I won't, because I love you more. Sometimes we do that. Sometimes we overestimate our love for Jesus. It is better to underestimate than overestimate our love for Jesus. What does that mean? Sometimes we think we love Jesus so much. We might even tell him in our prayers, something to the effect of, I love you so much. And then when a test comes in our life, we fail immediately. We don't even put up a resistance. Like Peter failed when there was no real test. It was a servant girl. Then you don't love Jesus as much as you thought that you loved him. St. John's a bit wiser, and I think he's the wiser for what happened to Peter. And in his epistles, he tells us we love him because he first loved us. He even says not that we love him, but that he loves us. And so what's more important in my prayer is I acknowledge you love me so much. And Peter got the message later on, a few days later when they had breakfast by the sea, and Jesus asked him that really, really probing question, Simon, son of Jonah, do you love me more than these guys? And he didn't dare say yes. He said, Lord, you know that I love you. That's it. I don't know how much I love you. I'm not going to lie. I used to think I loved you more than all of them, but by my actions, I was worse than all of them. So I love you. That's all I know. And I'm not going to lie. I do love you, and you know that I love you. And please don't ask me more than. I don't care anymore to compare myself with anybody else. Tell me. He does. Yeah. No, of course. Of course. But St. Peter crossed a line that you probably don't cross. St. Peter said to Jesus face to face, you're wrong, I'm right. We all love the Lord and we all fall. It doesn't mean that we don't love him. But St. Peter said, I love you more. If I ever say to God in my heart, I love you more than the person sitting next to me, that's a sin. If I ever think in my mind, I'm in the Mass, and I think in my mind, I love you, God, more than all these people. And if persecution came on the church, I'd be a martyr. Because Peter said that. Peter said, if they try to kill you, Jesus, if all these guys run away, I'll die for you. He said that to Jesus. So it's not that he didn't love Jesus, that he loved Jesus sincerely, but he fell into a trap. And the trap is when you boast, when you don't know yourself. You don't know yourself. None of us knows themselves. I'll give you an example about how we don't know ourselves, okay? Do you remember Job? He's probably the most righteous man who ever lived on the earth. But he didn't know himself. He didn't know himself. He thought he was holy. That was his problem. He thought he was blameless. But he was actually self-righteous. He actually knew that he was good and he thought he was better than other people. But only when he started to hurt, things started coming out of him that shouldn't come out of someone that loves God perfectly. He says things to God like, you're wrong, I'm right. You're unjust, I'm just. He says things about people like, these are scum. I wouldn't have even put their fathers, their kids, to tend my flocks. They're just dogs to me. All this came out of Job. So St. Peter definitely, we're not going to object. He loved the Lord so much. And by the way, when he said to Jesus, I die for you, he meant it. He was sincere. And that's the thing about St. Peter's fall. He was sincere in his love. He was sincere in his proclamation that he would die for Jesus. But there's something that we cannot excuse St. Peter for. Jesus said to him, all of you will be made to stumble. He said, you're wrong. Jesus said to him, you're going to deny me 3 times. St. Peter said to him, you're wrong. You're wrong. He made Jesus out to be a liar. It happens in my life. Sometimes I overestimate my love for God. And God tells me, trust me, your love for me isn't what you think. You want me to give you this gift, but you won't handle it if I give you this gift. You don't have that kind of love for me. You want me to allow you to take this on, but trust me, your love for me isn't sufficient to get you through those tribulations. You are overestimating your love for me. Does that make sense? Is that a little bit clearer? Okay, it's that sense of presumptuousness. I'm putting too much. He should have rather trusted in Jesus. He should have trusted in Jesus' love. The high priest then asked Jesus about his disciples and his doctrine. Okay, there's two charges the high priest is looking for. He's asking about his disciples because he wants to accuse Jesus of insurrection and treason. In other words, you're gathering a mob to rebel against Rome. And he's asking him about his doctrine because he wants him to say, I am the Son of God, and accuse him of blasphemy. In other words, treason is enough to charge him under Roman law, death penalty, and the doctrine is enough to charge him under Jewish law for blasphemy. Jesus answered him, I spoke openly to the world. I always taught in synagogues and in the temple where the Jews always meet, and in secret I've said nothing. Why do you ask me? Ask those who have heard me what I said to them. Indeed, they know what I said. And when he had said these things, one of the officers who stood by struck Jesus with the palm of his hand, saying, Do you answer the high priest like that? Jesus answered him, If I've spoken evil, bear witness of the evil. But if well, why do you strike me? Okay, again, we know this story. Some things maybe that may not have stood out to you. Did Jesus deserve to be struck? Is his answer arrogant? He is being honest, but he didn't answer half the question. What's the half the question that he didn't answer? He hasn't said that yet, but what did the high priest ask him about in verse 19? His disciples and his doctrine. What's he answering about? His doctrine, well done. Why didn't he answer about his disciples? Yeah, it's so sweet. I never knew that before. He's protecting them. Because if he starts talking about the disciples, they want to incriminate the disciples to get them. Didn't I tell you Caiaphas is dirty? He wanted the disciples all along. It was a package. He wanted them. Jesus said, no, I'm not going to tell you anything about you. Keep them out of it. He's very smart in his answer. So he just talks about his doctrine. He says, if you want to hear, don't ask me. He actually says, ask my enemies. And that's how you know he's telling the truth. Anyone that's telling the truth, if you ask them about something, they should say to you, don't ask my friends, ask my enemies. Ask those who heard me. Go, tell them. Ask them, what did I say? And so in other words, he's saying to Caiaphas indirectly, you're a liar. The whole legal proceeding is a sham. And that's why the officer strikes him. I know it says with the palm of his hand, but the translation's not accurate. Some people think it's probably with a stick. It's probably with a stick because in Malachi, or in Micah, I think, there's a prophecy that talks about the king being struck on his head with a stick. It's quite likely the stick that they used to hold as servants of the high priest. And then his answer, if I've spoken evil, bear witness of the evil. So he responds in gentleness and meekness. But Jesus is an example that he gives us an example that a Christian can defend themselves but cannot take revenge. So there's a difference. I'm allowed to defend myself. I'm allowed to call out when someone's done something wrong against me, but I'm not allowed to take revenge. Jesus spoke in gentleness and in love, but in truth. He said, you tell me, if I've said something evil, what did I say that was wrong? Otherwise, why'd you hit me for? But then he gave his whole body later on to be struck. Then Annas sent him bound to Caiaphas the high priest. Now Simon Peter, we come back to Simon Peter, stood and warmed himself. Therefore they said to him, okay, now it's getting a bit more. Who's they? The officers. Would you be scared if officers asked you, do you belong to that guy inside there that's just been condemned? Okay, all right. So we feel a bit sorry for him. There's a bit of fear now, okay? All right. How many times did he deny Jesus? Did he have to deny him 3 times, by the way? Did he have to? Is it like a package? What did Jesus tell him that shows us it didn't have to be 3? It could have been 1. Could have been 2. Yeah, didn't need to warm himself, but also how do we know? How do we know it didn't have to be 3? I know it was going to be 3 because Jesus said before you deny me 3 times, but he didn't have to do it 3 times. When did the rooster crow? It crowed twice. Okay, it crowed in between denials. So after the second denial, the rooster will crow, as if to say you don't have to go ahead with the third denial. Run, run. And that's a message for me. The message is for me. Sometimes in my life, I feel Jesus is arrested, which means he's passive. He's not doing anything. In fact, things might be going not too well for me. It seems like he's about to be crucified. What I shouldn't be doing is I shouldn't be going to the evil crowd and trying to warm myself, trying to make myself feel better with evil company and evil habits. What I should be doing is fleeing that scene and either getting inside there and being with Jesus, or if I can't do that, run and go be with the other disciples. There was no reason for him to be alone. But when I'm alone, then I'm prey to the devil. He could have been with John. He could have been with the other disciples. Peter alienated himself. He did what Judas did, but not as badly, thank God. But he alienated himself. He isolated himself. And he was a sitting duck. Now it's scary. You're not also one of his disciples, are you? He denied it and said, I'm not. One of the servants of the high priest, a relative of him, whose ear Peter cut off. Oh, okay, here we go. This is done. He's done now. This is Malchus's relative. Who can identify him? Didn't I see you in the garden with him? Peter then denied again, and immediately a rooster crowed. Then they led Jesus from Caiaphas to the praetorium, and it was early morning. But they themselves did not go into the praetorium, lest they should be defiled, but that they might eat the Passover. So we think at that time there were two groups of Jews. We think that they operated under different calendars, but some ate the Passover on Good Friday, some ate the Passover on Covenant Thursday. When did Jesus eat the Passover with his disciples? Covenant Thursday. But the Jews here are saying, we can't go into Pilate, otherwise we're going to get dirty because he's a Gentile, and we're going to eat the Passover tomorrow. So imagine when Jesus was being nailed to the cross, all the Passover lambs of those who had the second calendar were being slaughtered in the temple. So if you juxtapose the two images, you've got lambs being slaughtered, but then you've got the true Lamb of God being slaughtered. But because Jesus was going to be up on the cross, he did it the day before. Pilate then went out to them. Okay. Put your hand up if you can see a virtue in Pontius Pilate in that verse. Pilate then went out to them and said, what accusation do you bring against this man? There are two virtues here in Pontius Pilate. I'm not saying he's a good guy, but there's good in him. Yeah. Have you guys ever thought of Pontius Pilate beautiful as a humble man? He's so humble. Here are these Jews, right? Remember, these are pathetic Jews in the eyes of the Romans, right? They're coming to his door. They want him. He's the judge. And they're saying to him, but sorry, we can't come into you because you'll get us dirty. Can you come out to us? If I was the governor of Judea, if you were, what would you say? Yeah, I don't have time for you. Come back to me when you can get dirty. Come back to me when you can afford to be defiled. We'll talk after the Passover. Pontius Pilate's so humble. He goes out to them. And he asked them what accusation? Why? Because Jesus, and they do show this, I know in some movies, he comes out looking really bad. He's presented to Pontius Pilate chained. That's a no-no. And definitely, after the spitting on him, the punching him, the slapping him, he would have been bleeding. Now, why is this a no-no? In Roman law, you're innocent until proven guilty. In Jewish law, that's supposed to be the case too, except these guys are corrupt. Okay, so they held their little midnight council, they got away with murder. Okay, and Pontius Pilate's saying, can we just stop for a moment? Number one, why is he bloody like this? What did you do to him? What's he done wrong? Okay, I'm not just going to condemn him. And number two, what's going on with the chains? Untie him. The only people you could tie in this generation or chain like this were slaves. But unless you were a slave, you had to be convicted before you could be chained. What accusation do you bring against this man? I know you know the response. They answered and said to him, if he were not an evildoer, we wouldn't have delivered him up to you. Can you imagine a prosecutor in a court of law today? The judge says, what is the accusation you bring against the defendant? And the prosecutor says, are you joking? Do you think I got dressed up today and came to court if the guy didn't do anything wrong? Hurry up and condemn him. Pontius Pilate, he's no fool. He's saying, you're joking, right? So he understood straight away. He understood that what they say in verse 30. What do you mean? If he wasn't a bad guy, he wouldn't have bought him. He understood what they wanted. They just wanted him to act as a puppet. Here's a bad guy. We think he's bad. We don't care what you think. Kill him. Okay, because they weren't allowed to execute by crucifixion. They could stone a man. They were allowed to stone. And that's why Pontius Pilate says to them in verse 31, you take him and judge him according to your law. Therefore the Jews said to him, "It's not lawful for us to put anyone to death." That's not true. Remember they stoned Stephen? They were allowed under Roman law to stone, but they didn't want to stone. What did they want? They wanted to crucify. Okay, these guys are messed up. Okay, they're not just bloodthirsty. They want to humiliate him. They want to give him the cursed death on the tree. And that's why they say it's not lawful for us to put anyone to death, that the saying of Jesus dying by crucifixion might be fulfilled, which he spoke, signifying by what death he would die. Then Pilate entered the praetorium again, called Jesus and said to him, this is a beautiful private conversation. If you had a private conversation with Jesus, what would you ask him? What would he say to you? Here's a private conversation Pontius Pilate has on behalf of all of us. Are you the king of the Jews? Jesus answered him, are you speaking for yourself about this, or did others tell you this concerning me? What does that mean? It means, I know you've heard it from them. I know that's why they've delivered me over to you. So, yes, I am. And in other Gospels it says, it is as you say. Yes, I am. Pilate answered, am I a Jew? Your own nation and the chief priests have delivered you to me. What have you done? Here we see another virtue in Pontius Pilate. He wants to actually get to the bottom of everything. He wants to actually interrogate. He's being faithful as a Roman judge. Then Jesus answered, my kingdom is not of this world. If my kingdom were of this world, my servants would fight so that I should not be delivered to the Jews, but now my kingdom is not from here. Jesus is doing what he was doing at the start of this chapter. He's saying something very clearly to Pontius Pilate. Listen, I am a king, but don't be scared. There's no threat to Caesar. But my kingdom's not of this world. In other words, it's a spiritual kingdom. It's a kingdom over hearts. But, if I was of this world, I'd have an army, like you have an army, and then I wouldn't be delivered. But my kingdom's not from here. Pilate therefore said to him, are you a king then? Jesus answered, you say rightly that I am a king. Now, you'd think as soon as he said that, he should be judged. That's treason. If you say you're a king, that's treason. But it's not, because Pontius Pilate understood Jesus. Pontius Pilate understood when Jesus said, I'm a king, but not of this world. He understood that Jesus was not actually trying to create any kind of insurrection, and that's why he'll go out and say Jesus is innocent. For this cause I was born, and for this cause I've come into the world, that I should bear witness to the truth. Everyone who is of the truth hears my voice. Pilate said to him, what is truth? And when he had said this, he went out again to the Jews and said to them, I find no fault in him at all. This is the question that doesn't receive an answer. Any ideas why Jesus doesn't answer Pontius Pilate's question, what is truth? In verse 38, any ideas why Jesus doesn't answer that question? First of all, do you know the answer to that question? Do you know the answer? You're so confident. Yeah. Yeah, it's a wonderful answer. But answer it in words. What's the answer to the question? Yeah, well done. Okay. So say it in a way that someone that doesn't know that Bible verse, I am the way, the truth, and the life, can understand it. What is the truth? Yeah, so imagine Jesus answered the question. What would the answer be? He could say, I am the truth, but I think Pilate would be still scratching his head. What's the answer? What is the truth? For this cause I was born, and for this cause I've come into the world, that I should bear witness to the truth. It's the reason Jesus was born, to bear witness to the truth. What is the witness that he bore? He said, I'm a king. That's true. What's the truth? Say it in the plainest way. We're going to be here all night. I need an answer. You have to know the answer to this question. Thank you. I am God. That's the truth. I, the criminal that's bound, bloody, that you've scourged, okay, I am God. I am equal with God. I am one with God. That's the truth. I am his son, okay, by nature. Why didn't Pontius Pilate get an answer? Some people think, what are your ideas? Why didn't he get an answer? It's why you and I don't get some answers as well. True. Yeah. One opinion is, that's a brilliant one. One opinion is that even if I told you, you wouldn't receive it. That's true. If you've watched it in the movies, they show it really clearly. And if you read the account very carefully, it says, what does it say? He asked him, and when he had said this, what did he do? What did Pilate do? That's what I do. That's what I do. Do you do that? That's what I do. I ask God something in prayer, and then I leave prayer. You ever done that before? I know it sounds strange to say. I'll say it again. I pray, and then I leave prayer. Why did I do that for? Like, I prayed for 30 seconds, I asked him, and then I left. I prayed for 5 minutes, I asked him, then I left. Why did I do that for? What's missing in that? We don't deal with any human being like that. Hopefully not. There are some, I've seen some people do this. They're very difficult to get along with. Okay? They come to you, they talk. When they've said their piece, they walk away. What's wrong? What's wrong about that? What should you do after you've said your piece to someone, you've asked them for something? Yeah, listen, okay? Wait for the answer. Pontius Pilate did want to wait for the answer. Okay, so Jesus doesn't answer him. But you have a custom. Okay, here we go. I find no fault in him at all. 3 times Pontius Pilate, by the way, in the trials, found Jesus innocent. I should release someone to you at the Passover. Do you therefore want me to release to you the King of the Jews? Then they all cried again, saying, not this man, but Barabbas. Now Barabbas was a robber. Now, why did Pilate do this? It sounds unjust, doesn't it? Why would you pit him against Barabbas when Barabbas is guilty, Jesus is not guilty? It's because Pontius Pilate doesn't know what to do. He's at a loss. He's tried and he's tried to get Jesus to be free, but he knows that they've handed him over because of envy. So now he's appealing to the people, not to the chief priests. He thought that if I appeal to the people, they'll be of good sense and they'll release the righteous person and condemn the guilty person. Unfortunately, okay, the people under duress, okay, by the chief priests, they wanted Barabbas released. Anyone know what Barabbas means? What's that? Of the Father, yeah. It means son of the Father. Do you find that interesting? Who was condemned? God the Son of God the Father, right? And Barabbas is also son of the Father. Who's his dad? Symbolically. So all humans, we have a choice between 2 dads. 2 dads. God or Satan. Okay, God or Satan. Okay. Do you remember when Jesus says to them, you're of your father the devil, but I know whose father is mine? Okay, so here they chose the son of the devil, Barabbas, and they chose to crucify Jesus. Beautiful take home from today. We often think, okay, and we're reading this is interesting that you guys are reading it, it just falls after the resurrection. Jesus wasn't powerful when he rose from the dead. That's not when we discovered he was powerful. And he wasn't even most powerful when he was doing miracles. Jesus was exhibiting his greatest power in the passion. All the way through the passion, he was showing practically and by his words that he's the untouchable God. A couple of examples I'll leave you with and we'll finish because one is not mentioned here. Do you remember Pontius Pilate, when Pontius Pilate got a little bit arrogant with Jesus in another gospel? And Pontius Pilate says to him, why aren't you talking to me? Don't you know that I have power to crucify you? What did Jesus say? Thank you so much. Yet you have no power over me unless it's been given you from above. And that's when Jesus was sustaining incredible blood loss, incredible pain after the scourging, but he insisted on saying that to Pontius Pilate. Even to the very last breath on the cross, he's the one that decides when he dies, he decides how he dies. Do you know how you normally die on a cross? How do you normally die on a cross? Either, exhaustion or asphyxiation, okay, you suffocate. Jesus said, no, I'm not going to die like that. I decide how I die. Even if you crucify me, I decide how I die. And so all the medical evidence suggests that Jesus died of cardiac arrest, okay, on the cross. Even though he went through all the other suffering in the lead up, but because of all the sustained blood loss and the scourging and the pain of the cross, he decided when he'd die. He gave up his spirit, not his spirit was taken from him. And he proved it. It's so important to Jesus' mind, it should be really important to us. Up to Jesus' last breath, he wanted to prove to everyone watching and forever and ever that I die willingly. And he does what can't be done. He yells with a loud voice. He cries out with a loud voice, impossible to do for someone being crucified. He yells out with a loud voice, and then he says, now I commit my spirit. And then he brings down his head, which you can't do if you die on a cross. He decides how he dies. He decides when he dies. He's in complete control. What's his message to us? This is the powerful, this is the authority of authorities. This is Jesus. We don't just celebrate him in his resurrection, that he's stronger than death because he rose from death. He was already going to rise from the dead. He was already way, way stronger than death itself because death couldn't take him. He submitted himself to death. Stronger than pain, stronger than human beings. He's our God. So all this is to strengthen our faith. At the end of the day, if I were to pray one prayer on the back of this chapter is, Lord, you have all this authority, and in my life, I often doubt you. In my life, I often pray, and I'm not sure if you've got my best interests at heart. I'm not sure if you can do what you've promised that you'll do. You have all the authority. Nothing happens without your divine permission. So my life is completely in your control. Nothing happens without your divine permission. Nothing can touch me without your divine permission. And you're certainly more than capable of looking after me better than I can look after myself. Glory be to God forever. Amen. If you guys have any questions or comments, you're more than welcome, because you're very quiet. Yeah, perfect. Yeah. Yeah. It's hard to appreciate, but this is the truth. Like what you're saying, the divine plan, it's a divine plan, but it all happened by the hands of evil men. And it's the same in my life and in your life. The things that happen to us, they do happen sometimes at the hands of evil people, sometimes at the hands of circumstances in life. But nonetheless, if we're loving God and we're walking with him, it's still a divine plan. It's still a divine plan. And it reminds us, and that's the hardest thing to do sometimes, to surrender that our lives are governed by God. But Jesus did that perfectly. And you're right, in the midst of his humiliation, he was actually being glorified. Yeah. Thank you.
Thanks, Hany, for taking us through John chapter 18. So just a couple of announcements before we stand up for prayer. There's a candle night prayer on the first Monday of each month, so that will be next